All righty. Well, we are back for another episode, another culture chat with Be Kind Life. Today, we are joined by Ryan Bezenek, Vice President of Information Technology at Ariat International. Many of you probably know about them from the booth. I'm not going to get into Ryan's long, wonderful resume and all his stellar background, education, all the things there. You can check him out on LinkedIn for that. But really, why we invited Ryan is he is such a huge advocate and support for culture and engagement in the workplace. He really puts his people first. I've seen that firsthand. And we wanted to talk about emotional intelligence. So this has been a huge topic for me this month. Somehow I booked 5 different workshops on emotional intelligence in the month of May. So I'm coming off of that. So it's been all emotional intelligence all month long for me. And it's also Mental Health Awareness Month. But yeah, let's just dive right in and talk about emotional intelligence. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us. A little bit of why you think emotional intelligence is important and why we talk about it in the workplace.
Well, first off, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Rachel and I have known each other for quite some time, and we've kind of grown up a little bit together in the workplace. And I don't know, we talk about these topics quite a bit, and quite honestly, the emotional intelligence thing is, and we can talk about the CQ stuff later, but the emotional intelligence thing I think is the key to really driving success in the modern workplace. If you take a look at, and I'm sure, Rachel, you probably went through this as you were growing up in leadership, you take a look at what you see in film and TV and, what you think is leadership as you grow up, where you just tell people what to do and they go do it.
Yeah. Yeah. No influence there at all, right?
and you think, gosh, you look at, people around the world who are leaders, whether they're leaders of companies or, leaders of countries or whatever. And you think, gosh, what these guys or these girls just, they speak and people just do what they ask them to do. Right. Well, it actually doesn't work that way. Every single human being is their own, their own autonomous thinking, feeling, person. And, they are just as turned off or turned on by, the things that they're asked to do by the people that they're being asked to do them and how they're being asked
Oh,
and
yeah.
how they're
How they're
treated.
being asked. Yeah.
You certainly, the modern, enterprise is not the military. You can't just go in and say, go do this. And everybody goes, sir, yes, sir. Right. It doesn't work that way. People want to be fulfilled. They want to feel like they're cared for. They, and not in a disingenuous way, but in a real way. And when you talk about EQ, it's meeting people where they are, right? It's finding out the things that people are motivated by. It's finding out where they are on a day-to-day basis. I mean, you can have somebody come into the office. I mean, I'll give you an example out of my own life this morning. I got in a fight about my son's homework and his homework attention this morning. And I came into the office and I had this mixture of like, I'm still upset, I'm kind of disappointed in myself for how I handled it because I got a little angry with him. And, I'm stewing on that. And, I've got all these other things in my work life going on. And, that's a headspace that you come into, this work environment where, you're expected to come in and be this, now I'm in work, right? But that's
Right.
not how it works.
No.
And so everybody shows up into the workspace with all of this stuff that's either happened to them in the morning or over the weekend or the night before, or I mean,
Yeah.
if you really want to extend it, their entire lives,
That's right.
they've experienced
Show
all
up
this
with
stuff.
life.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Totally. And there's this lens that they come in with, right? And so the emotional intelligence is really about finding out where people are in their head and their hearts in the moment that you're dealing with them, and finding a way to work through things in a way that's inspirational and motivational for both sides of the equation. And I honestly think that you can't get the best out of people unless you meet them where they are. And that's where I think, emotional intelligence is really important. It's, some people have it innately. Some people, I think, naturally connect with people on an emotional level, but it's also something that can be taught. And it's a set of tools, right? And the tool actually starts with, how do I connect with this person as a human being? And how do I find out who they are and what they want, and how do I help them satisfy that to get to the ends that we all are trying to get to in the work environment. And that's why I think, I mean, I could expound on this for.
I might even add, I love how you say, first of all, head and heart, right? That's the pieces coming together. But I might even say, too, that the first step is really knowing to connect with yourself, right? How you feel emotionally, what's going on for you first, right? That's the self-awareness. And to know, like, that the impact of your fight with your kid this morning, for him not doing his homework, is going to show up with you, right?
Oh,
It's
totally.
the first question I ask all the time. How many of us think we leave our personal stuff at the door when we walk in? And you'd be amazed still how many people actually think that they should do that, and that they do that. And I'm like, you don't, because just for that example, you come with all your stuff.
Well, it's also a tool, right? I mean, it's a technique. You can channel that stuff for good or for bad. And you're absolutely right. Like, knowing your own mindset, your heartscape, wherever it is that you are at as a person when you walk into the office. It's there's a TV show, and I can't remember what the TV show is called, but where they're able to forget everything that they do in the office when they go home, and forget everything that they do at home when they come in. And it just doesn't work that way, right?
No.
And it's very easy. I mean, it's so easy to walk into the workplace and you've just got this salty mindset, right? And then you blow people up, and you're just not your best self. And that doesn't lead to great outcomes, right? And so you're absolutely right. Knowing who you are, knowing where you are in here and up here, when you are in any situation, I guess it helps to frame how you react. And also, it could be a trap too, because you could fall into that. Well, I'm just pissed off, so I'm just going to, blow everybody up, right?
Yeah. I'm being my authentic self.
Or
and that's a trap too. And actually falls into the culture conversation we should have too, because being your authentic self doesn't mean that you can be, an a-hole all
jerk,
the time.
No, I mean, but this is the problem, right? Is you sort of start to get into this space of like, oh, we have to show up as ourselves and show up as who you are. And it's like, well, I'm just, I'm Italian. And so I just have an attitude, or I just get fiery. And it's like, okay, however, you're a person, a human that exists in this space with other humans that might not respond well to that. That's the whole thing for me with emotional intelligence, right? Is this like, this really isn't actually about you at all. Like, it's not about me at all. It really is about, I want to communicate this thing, or I want to execute this thing, I want to do this thing. What do you need for me to inspire you to be able to do that? Or whatever that is, right? So it really, communication is so interesting, because people think it's really about what they're saying. It has nothing to do with what you're saying. It's absolutely how that is being taken.
Yeah.
And if you don't understand someone's headspace, if I don't understand that you clearly your energy is off today, like, I don't have to know that, if I know you and I see you every single day, Ryan, I don't have to know that you got in a fight with your son, but your energy is going to be off. All I have to do is pay attention, right? Because you're non-verbally telling me all kinds of things, right? And so sometimes it's like, actually, in all fairness, shut up, don't say anything, just observe, and you'll see where a person's at, and then you can really try and help meet them with where their energy's at, or even help to balance their energy.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up, because I was actually thinking a lot about this over the weekend. Communication is so imperfect, right? I mean, and you learn about this in communication courses and behavioral courses and all this stuff, and you go, okay, I have all the greatest intent in the world to try to communicate something, right? And I might be the most eloquent person in the world, and I might have all this EQ or whatever, but unless the other person across the way is actually taking away from it what you're intending, then communication is failed, right? It's totally failed. And this idea of like the authentic self, where I can just come in and, to your point, be like, well, that's just who I am, so people need to deal with it. I actually think that shows a stunning lack of emotional intelligence and
no social awareness,
self-reflection, right? And the ability to want to change how you show up for the betterment of other people.
Yeah.
That's why
Which is why we talk about it in the workplace, right?
Yeah, that's why I love the saying, hey, read the room. Like, you just came in ready with your prepared speech. I love it. You see it a lot, like, with salespeople. If you ever get on the sales, and like, they have their, like, prepared deck, and they're going to take you through all the thing. Meanwhile, there's no uh-huhs. People aren't nodding their head. It's like, you realize that you've lost the room and people can't adjust. It's like, I got my script, I got to go off my script. And I think when we talk about emotional intelligence, it's like, hey, this is where we talk about adjusting. This is where you got to start to be not just mindful and in this present moment, but flexible to how you're going to approach a situation. Yep. And a lot of people don't like, and we could get into probably a whole conversation about critical thinking and all of that. We sort of lack a lot of that now, right? It's sort of like, I'm just going in with the thing. I'm allowed to do this thing, and that's the thing, and it's the line. And it's like, but we're also dynamic, that we have to kind of be ready to like flex and move, bob and weave, if you will, when we need to.
Yeah. Well, I can't tell you how many times I've sat on Zooms or conference calls or even in-person meetings, and the room is just silent. It's just crickets, right? You could hear in the background, you can hear it's so silent. You just hear the cough all the way at the back of the auditorium, right? And you've got people who are leading these calls or these discussions, and nobody's talking. Everybody's off their camera, or everybody's just like checked out, doing it. Like you can see it. Like people are like,
yep,
they're off checking their emails or whatever.
Yeah.
And people don't pivot. People don't say, "Oh, this message is falling flat." Why? Because they're just like they're like the automaton, right? They're like, "We did this last month, and this is the." And you just go, "Hey, stop. Bring your head up a little bit. Like come up for air. Like take a look around and see that the message isn't being well received." And to your point, pivot. How do you then engage with people in a way that pulls them in and makes them want to engage? And therefore, the knock-on effect of that engagement is, how do we solve these problems, or how do we accomplish these goals, right?
That's right.
And you've now engaged people, and you've enticed them. You've piqued their interest, and they go, "Oh, hey, you know what? I just had an emotional response to this in a real positive way. How do I dig in further? How do we do more of that?"
This is sort of like, there's a lot of all this AI conversation right now, right? And AI is going to replace humans and this and that. And I'm like, here's an area. Now, maybe they can develop. I don't want to pretend like technology can't advance, but this is a great example of like why IBM, you don't want to replace your HR department, your people department with automation, with AI. You don't want to do that, because I need to look in your face. I need to see, how are you responding to this? What's really being said that's not being said? I don't know that AI can do that today.
What happens when the AI actually draws the wrong conclusions from the things that it's
right.
I mean, that's where do we go down
human condition as well. Human condition as well. But yeah, I think what you're saying here is so meaningful, because it really comes down to me, emotional intelligence really comes down to making a connection. I need to look you in the eye. I need to see, am I noticing that you're down like this as I'm talking? Am I noticing that your arms are crossed? Yep. And maybe, like, all these things are things that we do that tell us enough that most people just aren't paying attention to.
I would break it down even further, Andy. Connection is, I actually think, a byproduct of seeing the value in the human being sitting across from you. Ooh. Something that I have, I wouldn't say I've always had this, but something that I've definitely embraced as I've gotten older is I think I had some of this in my 20s. Maybe I didn't, maybe I don't know. But, when you sit down with somebody, whether it's intentional, whether it's somebody you meet in the grocery store line, or you're whatever, you're out in the world and you just randomly meet people. I personally believe that every single person, because of their unique individual life and what they've gone through, there is something that I can learn from every single person that I come into contact with. It doesn't matter if you're a CEO, it doesn't matter if you're the dude collecting the garbage, or, whatever it happens to be. Like, when you actually see the value that every human being has, and that they have the ability to contribute to the broader world in the relationships that we have with each other in a way that is unique and different. And I actually think that connection comes from starting from that perspective of, I value you as a human being because of your uniqueness and who you are. And the fact that you have maybe some of the same perspectives that I have, but probably not, right? And I can learn.
Hopefully not. Yeah. How do we learn from those things?
Exactly. And for me, I think that starts with humility, and it starts with this idea that I don't have all the answers, and maybe the lenses that I'm viewing the world through aren't necessarily the right ones. And don't get me wrong, I a lot of times find myself falling into the trap of, oh, well, I'm the one who's the smart one in the room, or it's my, I have the right perspective, or I've thought this through logically. And I think everybody falls into that trap. But if you really start from a place of humility and go, okay, you know what, that's maybe not always the case, probably majority of the time not the case, then you can find that value and that connection with other people, because they can enrich your life in a way that you maybe haven't thought about. And when I say enrich, I don't mean like they need to make my life better, but they just come with new perspectives and different ways of thinking, and they can approach a problem in a different way that, maybe unique and individual.
It's why the concept of right and wrong is so fascinating to me, because it's very easy to sit from your space, again, sort of off topic, but you think about terrorism, right? And you like, this person is totally the evil. They're the axis of evil, that they came and they blow our stuff up.
Yeah.
And I can remember having conversations with people like, okay, don't get me wrong, it's terrible. Like, let's not blow people up. That's a horrible thing to do. Yeah. However, if from the time you were 1 year old, you've been told about these people who've taken over your homeland, who've killed your like whatever the story is,
yeah.
Can I say that they're wrong? I mean, we even had this, again, this is like January 6th. It was like, well, what did we think the outcome was going to be? Once you basically preached to people for 5 years that their freedoms were all being taken away. Like, yeah. What did we think was going to happen, right? Can I call all those people evil? No, they were in an echo chamber.
I do.
I know, but like they were, I'm not saying that they don't have culpability for their behaviors, but they were in an echo chamber of people that they trusted, people that they valued, that continued to tell a story, and a story over and over. And so when you get into this concept of right or wrong, you're like, I don't know, I can put a stake in the ground on it.
Yeah, which is also why the diversity of thought is so important, right? That we need to expose ourselves, even albeit uncomfortable, to hear what other people's perspectives are. Now, in the workplace, hopefully it's not as uncomfortable to hear people's perspectives, but we definitely still have to make sure that we have a way to get everybody's perspective.
Oh, it can be the topic. It can be really.
Well, people have point of views, right? And those can be differing point of views, but I don't know that it's at the same level of, the political landscape or political minefield where people feel that.
It's interesting, Rachel.
You're free to sit there and have these conversations.
But we kind of are in that state, right? Because when we talk about cancel culture, if you're not on my side, if you don't think all the ways that I think, I no longer want you to be employed. I don't want you to live.
Yeah.
I don't, because you're out because you don't think like I do. So what I think is that we have to sit in the space of being a little uncomfortable. I have to hear Ryan's perspective, and maybe I don't like it. Maybe I think it's the totally wrong thing. But to his point earlier, what can I learn in this space? How can I be, Rachel and I like to say, empathy, curiosity, and grace. How can I just be curious? Like, let me just understand where he's coming from. Let me hear. And maybe at the end of the conversation, we don't agree, but I still have respect for him because I don't know what's brought his life to these choices and these decisions. I just want to understand. So I think those three principles, even when we circle back to emotional intelligence, it's like, it starts with like, let me just take a step back. Let me take a breath. Let me try to understand who you are as a person.
So you bring up an interesting point there. And I will say that it is, it's interesting that you bring it up, because one of the things that we do here at Ariat a lot is ask a lot of questions. And to some people, maybe the uninitiated or the people who aren't used to that kind of culture, people can feel very like, oh, well, I'm the expert in the room. Why are they questioning me, right?
Exactly.
And it's really not about that. It's about that curiosity that you were just talking about, that understanding. Like, we want to be able to make the best decisions possible. And so we ask a lot of questions. And I think the point that you were just making about connection, especially as it relates to kind of our modern society and how we talk to each other anymore, this cancel culture. Nobody asks questions anymore. Nobody says, well, say, I don't quite understand that. And then ask the follow-on question. They just go, well, I don't agree with that, so I'm going to push my feelings and my thoughts and my gut reaction down their throat. Whereas if we were to just step back and say, okay, I'm going to ask some questions about that, because it just made me react emotionally in a certain way. How can I understand more about that so that we can connect and that we can be more human with one another? Because to your point, we're at this point in culture and, and around the world where if it's not my way, like, we're going to bomb you, right? Or, I mean, and so we don't ask. I think asking questions, connecting with people. You're absolutely right. I mean, it's this connection that outside of the work. It's funny though, because I think inside the workspace, we're evolving more towards this way, and outside of the workspace, we're devolving in some ways, right?
Yeah.
I see more of these tools and techniques used. Maybe it's the location I'm in, maybe it's the company I'm in, but I see more of these tools and techniques coming into play on a regular basis within the work environment, and we're losing them outside the work environment. It just seems strange.
It's one of the reasons I wanted to really start in the workplace. We spend most of our time at work. We actually get, I would say, really great workplaces, do these workshops, do these things to help you sort of understand how to communicate better, understand different cultures, all of that. And so I think the workplace is a perfect place to do it, because you're just spending most of your time there. Yeah. Then all of a sudden it starts to be behavior and habit, right? Where you're just sort of engaging and interacting. My sister, she works for the YMCA, and she's a teacher, and they put them through active listening. And my family is one, my family's from Jamaica. And so everyone just tries to take it up an octave, like as everyone's talking, and then everyone's talking, and it just gets louder and louder and louder. And she was like, oh, I learned about active listening, that like I shouldn't be preparing my answer. And now she brings that into like our family discussion. She sits quiet while she's listening, sort of trying to understand other people. And then she's able to, her and I are still working to get our words in edgewise. Like, okay, but can I talk now? Like, we're still working on that. But at minimum, she did this thing at work, and it's translating into her home life. So I think there's this opportunity with work. If we can do this on a consistent basis, it can really translate into broader culture.
Yep, agreed.
And not to say that our work relationships aren't impactful. Certainly they do. We all know that, they have a huge influence on our lives. But if we can practice these skills in the workplace that usually are a little less emotionally charged than some of our home stuff with people that we are, committing to our lives to, or they committed for us, like our parents or our kids, right? On topics that really are high energy, high emotion, then maybe it makes it easier to practice there. That's what I always tell folks. Like, find something you're working on that's like low, that has less energy around it. Like, is there something smaller that you can just practice that skill before you go into something that really is emotionally charged, or that you really do have a strong point of view on?
And you do have to practice it. I mean, it's like any other muscle, right? When you first start doing it, you're like, oh, this 5-pound weight's really hard.
Yeah, uncomfortable.
After 15, and then 3 sets of 15, you're like, oh man, you're tired. And a couple of weeks go by, and you're trying it out in the 5-pound weights. You're like, oh, finally, these 5-pound weights are starting to feel pretty. I'm going to step up to the 10s, right? And emotional intelligence, connecting with people, like, to your point, finding, non-critical, like low stakes ways of doing this, so important. And I will tell you, out of my own life, I started, this stuff probably a decade ago. And I still find myself in challenging situations having to fall back onto, like, okay, just breathe, calm down, take a breath, let my reptile brain calm down a little bit.
Right.
It's, this isn't heart surgery, we're not saving lives here. We're making boots, and it doesn't have to be as emotionally high stakes as my adrenaline.
I don't know, Ryan, some of these cowboys out here, I'm telling you, you better make those boots are like brain surgery. So,
well, I mean, and ultimately, I guess the point is that you just got to try it, and you got to keep doing it. And there's going to be failures. Nobody is ever perfect.
But I think the point is not to shy away from it, right?
No,
we hear emotions, we shy away from it. Like, no, just embrace it, keep going, keep going. We're always works in progress, right? If you're not busy being born, you're busy dying. So we've got to keep taking steps. I don't think this is something that you master, right? Like you said before, EQ is something can be learned. That's why it's the difference between IQ and EQ, right? You work the muscle, you can continue to grow. Although some people think, you have a spectrum that some folks are never going to be that emotionally intelligent, no matter how much they work on it. I don't personally agree with that, but it is certainly a school of thought. But the other quote that I hear a lot too is IQ gets you hired, but EQ gets you promoted. And again, back to your earlier point, like this is why we talk about it in the workplace, because you could have all the smarts in the world, but if you can't influence, if you can't connect with people, if you don't see them, meet them where they're at, figure out what makes them tick, you will not be effective. You will not be successful, both for yourself and your career and your ambitions and all that stuff, but really just basically on the work. Like you get more bees with honey, that doesn't come from nowhere.
Yeah, and you're never going to be perfect at it, to your point. I mean, I think the important thing there is you keep trying. And if you screw up, you screw up. You go say, I'm sorry. Hey, I really screwed that situation up, right? I mean, there's, to your point about grace, being the last thing that you talked about earlier, I mean, being human is also to forgive and to say, hey, look, I screwed up. I'm working on
human.
That's right.
That's it.
The notion of perfection is unsustainable anyway. Yep. You're going to make these mistakes. You're going to trip. You're going to fall. The real oh gosh, I feel like I sound like one of these inspirational coaches. It's like, it's how you get up. But it really is. It's like, how do you respond? Exactly. But it's like, how do you respond to these things? Because it's coming. It's happening. There's no way you're going to get around it. It's like, how are you going to respond to it? And I think the challenge that we have, if you want to know my opinion, is that we don't give grace. So people not only don't want to make a mistake, they're unwilling to admit that they've made a mistake. They're definitely not apologizing. I mean, so you sort of end up in this cycle of like, well, you can't be perfect. Now you're screwing up. Now you don't even get to improve on the thing that you screwed up because you're not even admitting that you screwed up. Now you've created a conflict here with somebody. I mean, it's all around. It doesn't work out.
Oh, it's the opposite of a virtuous cycle.
It's an unvirtuous cycle. You just coined it, Ryan. We've got a new term now.
Right.
Unvirtuous cycle. Oh,
yeah.
So not to like toot my own horn, but I find that I used to do that in traffic and when driving. I'd make a mistake or I'd not be whatever, and somebody would honk at me, and then I get all upset. And like, if I would have just been like, oh, you know what?
Sorry.
I really did screw up there. Sorry. And I actually find myself doing that now. Like, instead of getting all whinged up inside, if I do something stupid and somebody flips me the bird, I'm like, hey, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Human. What are you going to do?
And don't you feel
I
better?
love that example.
Well, for sure. Because otherwise you get all like scrunched up and you're like this all day long. And you're like, oh my God.
This is like the thing for me is it's like, listen, if you just like live life happier, like admit to your thing, you wave at the person. I do it all the time. I accidentally cut someone off. I'm like, sorry, like roll down my window. Sorry. Like I want you to know I'm sorry.
My bad.
And then guess what? I drive up the road and I'm back listening to the music and it's like off my chest. If I don't, and then the person honks at me, and now we're both driving through the room, and everyone's trying to cry. And you're like, that is just such a useless, it's a waste of energy. It's useless to you. It doesn't help at all.
I think it's really hard, though, especially nowadays. And maybe, maybe I'm sounding like an old man because I'm sure my parents back in the old days. Honestly, I think the world moves so fast right now, and there's so much pressure on people, whether it's the war in the Ukraine, the high gas prices, inflation, debt ceiling, whatever, right? And then you come to work and you're like, oh, these external pressures. And we all everything's moving so fast and there's no room for grace or error, it feels like. Yeah. And we all take things so seriously because everything outside seems really serious. And then we get in here and everything else seems really serious.
Yeah.
If we all just took a breath and like, we're just like, look, just relax a little bit, you know, like everybody
find the
calm
humor in
down.
things too, right? And find those ways to release the pressure valve.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, along the way, pressure released, and or we're in the road rage for some ridiculous situation. Well, no, I was just thinking too about that example that you gave, Ryan, about being in the road. Like that kind of goes back to these like low stakes encounters, to try what it feels like, to be gracious, to admit your mistake, to just apologize. Like you're never gonna see that person again, likely. You know, so it's a great example of just try how that feels, and oh wow, it worked better.
It actually helps if you have a partner in that too. Like if you have
accountability, somebody to call you on your crap.
I mean, I'll give you an example. So years ago, my wife and I, and maybe it was like when we were first married or while we were dating, I don't remember when it was specifically, but I was all like tied up emotionally about something, right? I was like, just, you know, and she was like, what is your deal? And like, and I just wouldn't let it go. And finally we were in the kitchen together and she actually sprayed me with the hose, right?
Yeah.
And she may have even spit water on me at one point and she was just like, dude, you need to like, this is not that high stakes. Like just in having people around you who are practicing this with you, who you have made tacit agreements with, like, hey, I'm working on this, right? This is something that I'm not perfect at. I would like for all of us to work on this together. And we do this with my leadership group. Like my leadership group has the absolute right to be like, Ryan, you need to maybe back down.
Get your head out of your tush.
You're a little bit too, emotionally involved in this.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say it is paid dividends on our team. And I'll give you an example. You know, we do a people pulse survey here at Ariat every year or whatever the cadence happens to be. And years ago, this is probably before the pandemic, right? Our numbers in my team were not awesome. They were like 74 was like the engagement score, which is, it's kind of, it's a C, right? It's passing. You get your diploma and you get to go to college, like to a second-rate college, but at 70.
You're fine.
Yeah, and you're fine. I mean, you're going to get through life. You're going to get a job and you're going to earn whatever. Like this last one around, we were an 86, right? And that's actually pretty phenomenal. I mean, that's trending towards like maybe you get to go to UCSD instead of wherever. And you go, you know what? That's awesome. And I'm not saying that to be like, oh, yay, Ryan and his team. Like that's the kind of thing that you go, you know what? This actually works.
Yeah.
We've focused on this. We have done the work, right? Mm-hmm. Now, are there things that we still need to improve upon? Of course. But those are like incremental things that can happen over time that you go, gosh, people are actually pretty happy because of these behavioral changes. You can see it reflected in how they show up, how they perform, and the quality of the relationships that you have with one another. I mean, and it's again, a quantitative way of saying, that it works, but I think the proof is in the pudding there.
Can I ask you a question, Ryan, about that? Because you went from the 74 to the 86. The process, because this is what people love the outcome, but they forget what that process is. Can you talk us through a little bit about like even how the change management happened and just the process in general? It's
such a subtle evolution over many, many years of work. Right? I mean, my team and I, so let me give you some of the background on my team. So I have a couple people on my team that have worked here at Ariat with me for about 10. I've been at Ariat 14 years, and several people on my team have been here 10. I have other people on my team who've been here about 5. And I've got a couple more people on my team who've been here, like one of them just got hired like 2 weeks ago, and that's one of my direct reports. And then another one who's been here about a year and a half, 2 years. So we've got this interesting, striation, I guess, of different tenures on the team. And, we started doing kind of like leadership development stuff maybe 4 or 5 years ago with the team. And, Rachel's been a part of that. And it's been an evolution. I mean, it's not something that you just turn it on and it works, right? I mean, and you have to practice it. You have to hold each other, again, you have to hold each other accountable to it. And, it really is kind of this like, okay, I am going to, literally every time I sit down with somebody, I think to myself, okay, what is this person going through? What do they need? How can I help them? Right? It's really this mindset of, I need something, we need to do something together. It's like, okay, how can I help you? You said it earlier, Andy. Like, it's not about what I want. It's really about what that other person wants. And it's slowly doing that over time and incorporating that into your thinking, incorporating that into meetings, incorporating that into, how I interact with, I mean, as an example, like my help desk team sits right outside of my door here. And like, I don't go, well, they're the help desk team and blah, 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 blah. Like every morning I walk in and I'm like, hey, how's it going, guy? How you doing? How's your weekend? And, I mean, and that's not just like lip service stuff. That's important stuff. Right.
And people know the difference between when they know that you feel it, that you're actually there to connect with them versus like, okay, some leadership person told me that I was supposed to say hello. Good morning. How was your weekend? Oh, okay. You can keep up the good work. Right. They know the difference.
No, totally. Like, and to your point about that, there are things that you can do that genuinely show that you care about that person and you value. I mean, like when they have accomplishments or they work long hours or whatever, it's not just like, oh, nice job, thanks for doing it. It's like, hey, I know that, that took you away from your family over the weekend. And I know you probably had other stuff going on. Please, like, take your wife out to dinner on my dime, or like, here's an Amazon gift card, buy your families. I mean, it just, sorry, that was like probably a really crappy example, but like there are ways that you can connect with people when they have gone above and beyond, or even if they're just doing their day job, and that show that you really care.
Again, you're seeing them. You're seeing them.
But it's the showing. It's the showing that you care. Obviously gifts are great, but in my experience, employees much prefer you come in and you actually are making eye contact with them and you care about what happened during their weekend. In healthcare, we do administrative rounds, and those are really like, let's just check to see how patient experience is. Let's check to see how employees are doing. And so people will say, oh, I did my rounds this morning on my way in. And I'm like, well, did you round or did you do a drive-by round? Because if the drive-by, if it was just a, hey, how's everyone doing as you're on your way to the office, that misses the point. The point is to actually engage with this person, not just to say how you're doing and hope they say fine so you can keep moving. You want to know how they're doing, how their weekend is. And so for a lot of people, you could have 0 pizza parties ever again and just have a manager that actually cares about how work is affecting life for these people. And you're going to see an incredible difference in how people engage. They'll want to be there.
Totally. And I will give you an example out of 2 examples, actually. So I report into our CFO/COO, right? And he has a weekly meeting on Wednesday afternoons from 4 to 5 Pacific. It's so backwards with what your traditional business environment should look like, right? Like we spend the first 15, 20 minutes just screwing around. Like somebody comes in and they're like, and a topic gets brought up, and then that topic leads to this and that and the other, and then we're all ended up laughing. Like 15 minutes in, we're all on the floor laughing, right? And he is a great example of this, because that is, I think, the way that we authentically, genuinely connect with each other as human beings. You don't just come in and go, all right, here's the agenda, and of course there are going to be meetings that are like that, right? But when you really are trying to build teams and you're really trying to build rapport and true solid relationships with those people, you have to take the time, right? It's not a perfunctory thing. It's not just like, well, check. Did I talk to Bob today? Check. It's not like that. It's spontaneous, and it's, random at times. I can't tell you how many times I've just, been rolling on the floor laughing about something in a one-on-one meeting with people that I have that has absolutely nothing to do with work.
Right. Yeah.
And some people will probably go, oh, well, that's wasting company time. Well, no,
That's
bullshit.
right.
It's not.
No,
That's
bullshit.
exactly that is like the number one thing that people always say. I don't have time to do that.
Yeah.
And I always push back on, you don't have time not to.
It is the most important thing that you can do.
And it is what makes the work more efficient, more effective. You get better thinking, you get better problem solving when you put in that work and that time to have relationships with people, for them to feel comfortable, for them to know that this is a place that they want to bring themselves to share new ideas and do the work.
This is the challenge, right? Because I'm asking you as a leader, what do you think your job actually is?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for me as a leader, your job is to inspire these people to execute to whatever the goal is.
Yeah.
Well, if you think not talking to them, or you think not engaging
Solving
with them, not
problem.
understanding, you are missing the whole point. So if you don't have time as a leader to connect with your folks, I'm like, you should go be an individual contributor. You should not actually be in charge of people.
But that is why, I mean, and hopefully we're seeing more of this shift too, right? People who get promoted into leadership or management roles because they've been very good at their job. So now,
Technical.
and this is what I see a lot in my clients, because this is the space that I work in, right? Those who are either newly minted leaders or, directors that now they've been really good at their job and having the answers. And now that is not their job. It's not your job to have the answers. It's your job is to enable and empower other people to come up with the answers.
A good way to ruin a good engineer is to make him a manager. No, I say that halfway joking, because it happens. I've seen it happen where, especially, and this is where organizational design is really important, especially as it relates to being able to promote individual contributors, because especially in tech, right? Especially what I've experienced in tech is that you take these amazing individual contributors and they cap out, right? They're like, well, I've hit the max of what I can do in this job role, so I must need to become a manager. And you go,
I want to make more money, I got to be a manager.
Yeah, and you go, that is not a great way to bring people into leadership and and trust me, there's a difference between management and leadership. There is a very distinct difference. When you're trying to cultivate leaders, you have to be able to go, that person has a desire to do it, not just that they want to get promoted into it because they want to make more money, or they think it's the right thing to do, or the next step in their career. It is a great way to not only ruin a good individual contributor, but to put a really bad manager in place and a really bad leader in place.
Ruin a good team.
100%.
That's right.
100%.
And I've seen it happen firsthand. I've made that mistake. I'm talking about this from personal experience.
Well, I mean, I think part of the challenge is in looking at leaders, organizations look for these people who are technically good at a thing. Yeah. Because even in a lot of most people don't have mentorship programs, but even in some of the mentorship programs, you're mentoring to technical. Do you know how to execute these things? Can you be this person that answers these difficult questions for tech? Yep. And they don't do a ton of like, hey, what is your EQ? Hey, how do you actually problem solve with people? How do you inspire people? That's not what's done. I went to business school, and I can tell you, I think I had like 3 courses in human resources, and 2 of those were about benefits. And it's like nothing about leadership and connecting with folks, Tons of accounting courses and finance courses and, how do you price appropriately and all of that, but like nothing around the sort of people element. And leadership is all people. That's all it is at the end of the day.
What's your working capital this month? No, I'm just
kidding. Exactly. Well, it's funny.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think they're in, not that this stuff can't be taught, but like making that leap from being an individual contributor to a leader is not what most people expect it to be. Like most people go, oh, well, I'm just going to take my technical expertise and then manage a bunch of people who are technical.
And tell them what to do.
And tell them what to do. Yeah.
Like the start of the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're trying to make that change, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're already talking about it with what you're doing at your organization. Rachel and I, it's how we work, right? People are like, "Hey, come in because we need to make this thing better." We're seeing VC organizations looking at culture as a metric as they're trying to decide on whether they're going to invest in a company. Those are huge, huge differences. So we're at the beginning of that, and as you talked about earlier in this process, this stuff isn't a thing where it's like, okay, we've got 3 months. This is the goal to get to at the end of the quarter to turn our culture around. It's like, it's just not going to happen that way. It's this slow incremental process where all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, this 15-pound weight feels like nothing. Like I can bench press this no problem. It's this all of a sudden thing that happens. So I think,
and you've got to enjoy the process. But that's it. You've got to enjoy the process.
You always have to enjoy the process.
Well, you have to, then maybe it's appreciate the process.
You have to appreciate that it's a process.
Yeah.
I think it's trusting. It's trusting that there will be fruit at the end of the labor, right? I'm a gardener, and I just spent this whole last weekend like weeding my backyard and putting new soil in the boxes and stuff. And I come away from that and I go, it's a lot of work and sometimes it hurts. Like I've got sore muscles today and all sorts of stuff. But I know in about, call it 3 to 4 months, like the fruit of those labors are going to be so awesome, and they're going to be enjoyed not just by myself, but by others around me and my family and the neighbors, because I share the stuff. And it's the same analogy in the workplace, right? You have to put the work in up front. You have to know that it's going to take time, and you have to put the care and feeding in order to see the results down the road. And it's not overnight.
Nope. And if I just had to cut down one of my, my pepper trees because it just wasn't producing peppers. It just would not do it. But I know the process.
Sucking water, the sucking resources.
But I know the process of you plant things, and so then you've got to go back and look, did I put the right food in? Was it the right amount? Was the soil correct? So even in this process of like, as you're thinking about this, it's not linear. It's not going to be this linear, stroke up. It's going to like have dips and valleys and all kinds of things, because it's life. Show me a life that is linear, that never has like a dip or a struggle or anything. I think one of the things we have to do is become comfortable with the struggle. Like sometimes it's hard. I know we all want to like take pills and like do everything to not feel anything, but like that's part of it. Like we have to feel these uncomfortableness. Yep. And then what's the resilience? Another thing we probably should talk about at some point. Yeah. What's the resilience to help us keep going? Because it won't be smooth sailing. I mean, life is just not that way.
Well, so in taking what you just said and tying it back to the cultural intelligence side of things, so it's interesting because what you just talked about, there's a little bit of a dark side to this a little bit, in that not everybody is going to come along on the journey.
Nope.
That's where I thought you were going. You had to cut the tree down. I was like, sometimes people have to go.
She just handed the baton to me. I'm going to run with it.
I'm like, no, but that was it. It was like, it doesn't always work. And
you got to make some cuts.
And that is the dark side of this, is that if you really want the culture that this can produce, you have to set the expectation with people that this is what we're driving towards. This is where we're going to get. And unfortunately, not everybody buys into that, and not everybody comes along on that journey. And that's where also being very human about, this, and being very caring, and sometimes you just go, look,
and that has to be okay, that they're not ready to go on that journey with you.
Yeah, totally. You're like,
okay.
Hey, this is the expectation. This is where we're going together as a team because of what we want these results to be,
right?
For us as human beings. And sometimes you just got to say,
And by the way, I'm going to provide you all the support. We recognize that you have a gap today. Right. We're going to provide you all this support. Yep. But at some point, we're going to recognize, and this is what I like to say, it's nobody's wrong. It's just, this isn't going to be a good, you're not having fun, we're not having fun.
Exactly.
Totally.
So let's help you go find a thing that's going to be more suited to what you want to do. Yep. It doesn't have to be inhumane at all, but everybody will not make it.
No. But that also too is, Andy, why, and you articulate this so well, but the difference between kind and nice cultures, we always find a way to bring it back to this, right? Because sometimes the kind thing to do is part ways.
Well, because
it's not fair
to that other person, really, to try to
fair to anybody, right? Yeah.
I mean, because really, ultimately, if you bring it back to the human side, it's not fair to that person what you're doing to them.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
In some ways.
My husband reminds me all the time, not all the time, but when it comes up about having to let people go, that every time that he has had to let somebody go, and he's had to do it too many times, well, no, he's had to do it just the right amount of times, that it's always been that they've thanked him. They've thanked him. It was done. It was over. It was not kind to keep putting that other person through this anymore.
If you do it the right way, like Andy was saying, right? You do it with care. You do it with compassion, right? Most of the time that I've had to do it, people have come back and said, you know what, that was the right thing to do.
And even when we've left jobs, right? It was the right thing to do.
So a natural result of all the things that we're talking about, I think, is culture, that cultural component that you wanted to bring into this conversation. And maybe that's a whole different podcast, but
I know
the cultural quotient.
Yeah.
We talked about it a little bit too, like this whole, I need to be my authentic self. The right cultural environment allows you to do that in a real positive way. So
that's right.
And reading the room. You still have to read the room.
That's right. Because I think there is this thing, and this is why I say human beings are so interesting, because we're just pendulum swingers. Like, we can never find ourselves kind of in this middle space. It's like one way or the other.
Yeah, the middle space. Or maybe
that's just
that middle space.
I'm like, maybe maybe it's a lot Western culture because we're very individualistic in the West. But it's the idea that you exist in a community. Yep. Like, you exist in a community. So your feelings are as valid as the next person's feelings. And so you being your authentic self shouldn't mean that you're stepping then on somebody else. That doesn't, that's not valid. So I think in this, we really should, because this culture quotient is it's a newer thing for me. Like, I had just really heard about it. I read an article about it, I don't know, last week or the week before. And I was like, what is this? And you realize it's been around maybe 10 years or so. But it really was talking about demographic culture. But I think broadly, it plays in now, right? Like, how are we, to be honest, I don't know that it's all that different from emotional intelligence, from empathy, from all these things that we're talking about, because it really is about, like, hey, like, let me get to know who you are as a person and support you in the way you need to be supported, not in the way I think you need to be.
Yeah. The one thing I do want to underscore on that too is when we show up authentically, and be who you are, and you can't step on somebody else. It's like, do no harm, right? Like, it can't come at a cost to somebody else, or I don't know. Well, as we wrap up here today, Ryan, I hope you'll come back and chat with us again, because this is super
this has
fun.
Been the fastest hour probably of the whole day today.
Yeah, very, very energized. But any closing thoughts from you on all the things we've talked about?
No, I mean, first off, thanks for having me. I'm a big believer in there are a couple different kinds of people in the world. There are those that you can pull energy from, and really it actually multiplies the energy level that you have. And then there are other people that are like energy vampires that come in and suck it away from you. I just want to say this has been great. This has been one of those energy multipliers today. And I certainly love talking about this stuff and being around people who like to explore the topic. And thanks for having me. And, I continue the work. It's good work. And, hopefully you guys are out there making a difference on this stuff. So thank you.
Thank you.
So, thank you. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah.